Hey guys, welcome back to the People's Perspective on Development with your host, myself, Tunisia Kassim. So great to have you back. I've been receiving a lot of love, a lot of comments, a lot of input, and that is what we wanted. That was the vision of the People's Perspective on Development. More than that, it was really about engaging you guys on what you think public space is, what is public life, and just giving you the chance to take the initiative to voice your thoughts, your opinions, your advice on public space and the spaces that you use on a daily basis. Today, we're going to have a continuation with Prof. Karina Landmand as we hear about planning perspectives on public space from a very knowledgeable academic in the field, as well as an architect, as well as a lecturer, and someone who has a passion for research and a love for understanding public space, sustainable spaces, regenerative spaces, and more than that, how do we serve the community at its best. Today's episode, we're going to unpack people's input. So, we sent out a survey and we cannot wait to hear your feedback. And of course, we're going to have expert advice and counsel from Prof. Karina Lampman herself on all that you had to share with us. So, without any further ado, let's get into it.
Ma'am, so this section, what I had done here was I had reached out to a few random people and asked them just some key questions about their spaces. So the first question was about where do they live? The second one, where they work, and then they had to describe more or less where they, that in between space, and just to get the idea, and then how do the places, they describe make them feel? What would they want to change? And then lastly, what do they think about public space and public life? Because often I think as planners, it's important to sort of translate our jargon to what the community understands. We have a lot of big words. We have lots of words to describe, but how do people understand it? I'm going to share just a few responses with you. Because like I think it really helps, sort of give us an idea of what the user has shared. So the first one in the top left, she is from, I'm assuming it's a she, I don't actually know. She's from Montana and works in Groenkloof. First thing that she focused on was the roads. They have potholes, they're bumpy, the Groenkloof area around Boys High. They've even filed for to the municipality a complaint to fix the roads. And then just in terms of, the in-between space, they feel like they have good amounts of shops and grocery areas. The place has, many options to eat, and that they, feel generally happy and safe. And she wishes that there was more leisure activities, parks, greenery around that area, which is very interesting because Groenkloof does have quite a bit of open space, but I wonder if it is allocated for parks. So yeah, she would change that, making more outdoor space available. And lastly, what does she think or he think that public space, public life means? Places where the general public of all ages, races, and identities go out to carry their daily activity, which is really great. And then where one can be safe. That I think on its own, this little survey already shared, in her community, this is what she needs.
Yeah.
And I think the Groenkloof area quite well. I think there is that definite element of safety when it comes to the parks in this area. A lot of them are quite open and, visibility is there. But just in terms of surveillance, I think is a key point here for public open spaces. Have you worked with, surveillance in your field? Like how do you think we would approach something like a scenario like this?
Excuse me.
No problem.
It's very difficult again to go back in retrospect. Also, it links back to issues around how much the community is willing to get involved. So if you go towards the side of Magnolia Dal, which is sort of just on the border, you and some of the spaces in the older Groenkloof area I know there's quite a bit of problems with homeless people and with how should I say, places not being maintained by the city council and things like that. So there's definitely a problem there. Surveillance is a difficult one because surveillance, you can see it from many angles. You can see it what they call passive surveillance, and that's where people can sit in a house or a building and they can overlook a space, or they can walk by. Now, generally in suburban areas, if you've got high walls, then it completely cancels the ability of surveillance. And that is a case in many of those houses. If you've got people not walking in the streets because they drive, I mean, she was saying she's driving. So then again, you don't have surveillance because you can't have surveillance if you're driving in a car. So you need a number of things to work together. Then you also have what they call active surveillance. Now, active surveillance is when you have somebody that has it's their purpose to do that. So private security or a police. Now we know for a fact police is not doing that. So that leaves private security. So if that community does not pay monthly for private security to drive through the area, then they're not going to have that. So again, it's that integrated approach. You need a whole lot of things to start working together. You need the municipality to look at the maintenance. You need to look at the agents of surveillance, both passive, active. You need to look at a whole different thing. How are you going to work with homeless people? How are you going to notify them of shelters and things? And the very interesting thing that has come up in the research is that often homeless people, I mean, you can look at some of the articles that Sarah Charlton have written on Joburg, but Kundani found very similar things in her PhD related. I mean, Magnolia Dal was one of her case studies. They're often not homeless, but they can't go back during the week to where they stay. It's too costly. So this person saying that she stays in Montana. Montana is very far from Groenkloof. So it means a lot of petrol. I don't know how she drives, but it means a lot of costs for transport. Now, if you can't pay that, what often happens is people during the week sleep rough. They call it sleep rough. So they're actually not homeless. I mean, Kundani has seen people in Magnolia Dal get up in the morning, wash themselves, put on a suit and go to work. You would never in your life think that person, if you meet him well dressed up in his suit in the street, that he slept in a park during the night. So I think our conceptions of that is, and that comes back to the planning of our cities. If you have to travel so far, then it's a problem. I mean, one of the biggest success stories that they've done is in Warwick Junction in eThekwini, where they built these very, very small rooms for rent for very little money for people to sleep overnight. And that was because they found out that the informal traders didn't have money to go home to. And eThekwini is very big. So they've got people staying on the edges. It takes a very long time to get there. So affordability and time-wise, they just can't go back during the week to where they actually have a house. So now they can sleep in a little room safely with their goods for, say, I don't know what it costs nowadays, but it's affordable, and then they go home on a Friday. So I think our conception of what happens in a public space is we really, really need to reconsider who is it. It's often, I'm not saying some people obviously don't have money, you can see it. But other people, it's just a mechanism to save money. So I think we need to think about that as well. And then you have the other side, sorry, very shortly. There's a group in Groenkloof that started, and it's one of our case study areas that we're looking at in this NRF project. A fantastic initiative from the community where they had a particular public space, but that's on the completely the different side of Groenkloof. Close to the Telkom Tower, where they decided there was a space that was unused. It was not good. There are people walking by every day. They need a place to relax. The community didn't want this eyesore. And they started to mobilize, and they mobilized the community. It's a wonderful story. They mobilized people, they had professionals involved, they gathered materials, and they've completely transformed that area. It's now called the Muckleneer Commons. It's a beautiful space. So it shows you sometimes you just have to I don't know what, take initiative.
Yeah.
But again, there are things, they had professionals that could help. They had people with connections that could get material. They had people with knowledge how systems works. They had organizations that could manage funding and could manage finances and could gather things. So yes, if you have those kind of things, it can be done. But there's also another example that we have from a group in an informal settlement that did something very similar with what they had, a different process, but very similar. So yes, there are great initiatives going on if we just look for them and if people are willing to do something. But you need those kind of champions and people to start the process. Otherwise, you're not going to get there.
But very key that you mentioned is that taking initiative. Sometimes, like what I've been seeing in my own personal experience in practice, is that our systems and procedures are really long. And, by the time we get it to the community after approval, the community wants something completely different, or the space we intended on developing on has been occupied. And here, we have a perfect example of this is the need. Let's gather the resources, the professionals, and the knowledge, and the required funding, and let's put, that directly to use to serve what needs to be done. I recently formulated this idea that I feel like sometimes South Africa is a billion-dollar development plan, because most of our projects are allocated on these huge scales. By the time the money gets down to the actual project and delivering, of the service, of the infrastructure, there isn't actually money. Or, if funding got lost along the way, or, we've had to pay salaries first in the municipality before we actually got to the development. And it's worrying because as planning professionals, we're obviously trying our best to keep safe standards of development and provide quality spaces. You don't, you wouldn't want any accidents taking place where someone had erected maybe a house and something collapses and so forth. But we have also a lot of policy and procedure that also sort of hinders our ability to deliver. If we see that an area needs housing, waiting for a township establishment application to be approved, over 3 to 5 years. By the time we, deliver those houses, there's probably like 100 more people.
Exactly.
All our social compact, surveys that we've done, it's not even the same numbers anymore. Yeah, it's such a, in this module we did what we called the black box theory in planning, is that we have great intention, we have great knowledge, then on the delivery side there's lengthy processes. It's a very interesting space. Ma'am, second one on the right, on top, mentions here what was very interesting. This person stays in KwaGasrand, Pretoria West, and works all the way in Arcadia.
Sure. Yeah.
One of the biggest aspects that they experience passing through is a lot of concrete buildings, trucks, taxis, and there are some beautiful spaces, but a lot of it is used for the actual, I think that area is industrial along that side. Something that you would love is, more beautiful trees and spaces, because there's a lot of pollution in the area. Some areas are maintained while others are left to ruins. There are 2 malls and lots of small spaza shops along the way. She does try to enjoy some of the beautiful gardens, but there's a lot of abandoned and broken down buildings. And she actually, what I found interesting about her is that, or this person rather, they do not go out or around the places near them. they would rather visit a mall or travel all the way to KZN for family time and relaxation. And here, something that they would change: more trees, better building maintenance, proper roads, cleaner air, and public spaces to be more cleaner, better maintained, and like parks and open spaces. It's amazing. This scenario is really amazing to see how far someone is willing to travel for their breathing space. And it's not even being in their home area, which is where they spend most of their time. I don't know if you have any comments or thoughts on that, this area and this scenario.
I think it just highlights one of the critical things in South Africa. A lot of people have written about it, and that's I don't know what to call it. I'll probably just call it the temporary city. But it's like we have a lot of migration is so rife and unemployment is so rife. So a lot of people come to cities to find work, but they've never developed a sense of belonging in that city. They remain a kind of a visitor. For them, it remains a temporary place of staying. So it's like, I'm here because I'm doing the job and I can earn an income, but I can't wait to go home.
Yes.
I've got another PhD student who's doing a fascinating study on African spirituality and public space, and how or how not public spaces actually accommodates that. And in a lot of interviews that has come up,
interesting.
If it's a question of, should urban public spaces actually make provision for African spirituality? Because traditionally people go back to the rural areas to do that.
Yes.
But if they start to accept the city as a more permanent place, then they cannot go home to KZN. This is, I'm linking to this thing.
Yeah.
They cannot go home to KZN every time they want to kind of find a sense of belonging or do something spiritually. There must be then a way that our urban public spaces can accommodate that. So yeah, I think a lot of people have got that difficult. I think there's still a lot of
like a lack of sense of home.
There's a lack of a sense of home, but there's also it's much more than that. It's also an issue of identity. It's with what do I identify? Do I identify with who I am if I am in KZN or in Limpopo or in the Northwest or wherever? Or do I identify with who I am if I'm in Pretoria or Joburg as this professional person?
Yeah.
And I'll just leave it there. I think there are quite a lot of things that have not been, that people have to struggle with. So yes, you're right, it goes back to where's home, but linked to where's home, it's linked to who am I? And that sense of identity may differ depending on the location. So it may differ that when I am with my family in a particular location, I am this and this is my identity. But when I then come to the city to work, and especially for professional people, then this is who I am. And often there may be tensions between the two.
And then the last point here, that this person lives in the East Rand, works in Parktown, and passes through Bruma and Yeoville. The roads are terrible, potholes on every corner, robots never work. There's usually a big hole in the road for months now, before it was actually closed. And this person feels that their country has failed them. And with the working robots, it would help decrease the travel time. Public life is using public space, like walking on the road, and public space is the area which can be used by the general public. What stood out for me about this one was that strong statement about they feel that their country has failed them. And it just shows the influence of the development sector and prioritizing, development, community development, and planning for people. Because it almost on a scale of my entire country has failed me, in their living space. Do you have any comment?
It's a very interesting question. I teach sustainable planning and design to the master students. I recently discussed with them the new book from Tselitsi Marlawa, which is the former VC of UJ.
Okay.
And he wrote on, the book is called, I must remember now, Healing My Country or something like that. Heal Our World. The book is called Heal Our World. And it's actually quite interesting because he talks about the SDGs, but then he says, what are the things that we need to address those commitments that the country has made? And he's very forthright. I really like the book. He calls a spade and he doesn't mince his words. He's got an engineering background and he comes from a small village originally, but then he became an engineer and then he became this huge IT person that specialized in artificial intelligence, and he's been all over the world, and he's now leading one of the biggest universities in Tokyo. So he's a guy that's been around and done a lot of things. And he's saying that we are very close to a failure of state, and for us to start addressing the issues around sustainable development, we really need to address the basic things in our cities. So we need to look at maintenance. So one of the key issues in public spaces is management and maintenance. We need to look at service delivery. We need to look at all of these things that are crucial. I mean, I don't know if you followed our saga around Hammanskraal and the water problems there and the cholera. And I mean, it just shows us, I mean, all they're doing at the moment is fighting whose fault it is instead of actually going to help the residents on the ground. So yes, it doesn't help that different parties are leading different spheres of government, but still, I mean, we need to move past this and we need to find ways in which we can actually address these issues, because otherwise, yes, this is what people are going to say, that she feels her country has failed her. And we couldn't. The one really important thing about sustainable development is you can never solve it if people don't solve it together. So it's not something that just the poor or just the rich can do. And the other thing coming back to this is, if you want public spaces to work, it must work for the rich and the poor. So that's how I bring those two things together, to say you cannot have places where people will not feel safe, otherwise they will privatize. The ones that have money will go and they will privatize, and they will go and sit in their shopping malls, and they will go and sit in their estates, and they will go and sit there for the time being before they leave the country, because that they feel the country has failed them, and that's the only way they can still survive. And then on the other hand, you will have people that cannot balance their finances, or literally don't have another place to go, and they will go and go to a public space like that. And often in the township areas and in the informal areas, those are the places that are being occupied. So you know, we need to go back to basics in terms of planning 101. What is service delivery? What is maintenance? What is this? And I know it's easy for me to say. I sit in the municipality and I often talk to a lot of municipal officials that are still very kind and still speak to me and still come and help me to teach the students. And they say it's very difficult because they don't have money. But yeah, so I do acknowledge that. But I do think we need to find a way to prioritize how we spend budgets, and also how we how we keep people, how we make people accountable for how the money is spent.
True. It's a very fragile conversation to have, because I mean we're seeing it now with electricity, also water shortages, is that our water capacity versus how the population is growing now is, it's not enough. And you want to have new housing development, and and provide all these services, but the basic of human need of electricity, water, sanitation, those aspects haven't been maintained over many years. And as much as we want to implement new, we haven't really, solidified our foundations.
All right, guys, thank you all for your input, for your contributions, and of course, your participation in today's episode about Let's Hear from a planner, let's hear from an academic, and today we also got input from our very own audience, and I've been really grateful for that, guys. As we do a quick recap and a breather on today's episode, I think it's very important to understand how do people see and understand public space and the spaces they exist in. And today we got expert interpretations and understanding from Prof. Karina Landman. And it's very important to note that public space, how it's designed versus how it's used by you as the community, is very different. And our strategies as town planners, as professionals, as developers need to ensure that when we are designing, we have community participation. And that was the importance of incorporating your inputs today. I hope that you had a wonderful time. We've got one last segment of episode 5, which is a book review. Really excited to add another inspirational read to your shelves, and I cannot wait to unpack it with you. But for now, thank you for joining me. Good night, goodbye, farewell. And that's me from the people's perspective, your host, Tunisia.